The security checkpoint guard took one look at Elena Vasquez, and his expression shifted to barely concealed amusement. She won't even get past the scanner, he muttered to his partner, who glanced up from his coffee and smirked. The morning sun cast long shadows across the main entrance to Blackwater Air Base, where concrete barriers and razor wire formed the first line of defense against unauthorized access. Elena approached the bulletproof glass partition wearing faded jeans and a simple gray sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a casual ponytail that made her look younger than her 32 years. Sergeant Marcus Thornfield had been manning this checkpoint for 8 years, and he prided himself on spotting trouble before it reached his desk. The woman walking toward him screamed civilian, and not the kind who belonged anywhere near a classified military installation. Her stride was confident, but that only meant she was either incredibly naive or dangerously stupid. He'd seen both types before, and neither ended well. Before we dive deeper into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar situations where someone's authority was completely underestimated based on their appearance. Elena reached the checkpoint window and placed her identification card on the metal tray with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to security protocols. Thornfield picked up the card without looking at her face, already mentally composing the incident report he'd file after turning her away. The photograph showed the same woman standing before him, but the credentials listed clearance levels that made him pause for exactly 3 seconds before breaking into open laughter. "Nice try, sweetheart," he said loud enough for the other guards to hear. "But level 9 clearance isn't something you can just print off your home computer." His partner, Corporal Danny Reeves, rolled his chair closer to examine the identification card. The lamination looked professional, and the security features seemed legitimate at first glance, but they both knew that sophisticated forgeries were becoming more common. Elena remained silent, her hands clasped loosely behind her back in a posture that Thornfield interpreted as nervous fidgeting. She's probably some reporter trying to get a story, or maybe just another conspiracy theorist who thinks she can waltz onto a military base with fake credentials. Either way, this was going to be the highlight of his week. He'd caught plenty of trespassers before, but none bold enough to claim Level 9 access. The identification card bore the seal of the Department of Defense and included biometric data, but Thornfield had seen convincing fakes before. What convinced him this was fraudulent wasn't the quality of the forgery, but the audacity of the claim. Level 9 clearance was reserved for a handful of senior officers and civilian officials with access to the most classified operations. This young woman in civilian clothes looked like she should be checking IDs at a movie theater, not commanding military installations. Reeves activated the card scanner, fully expecting it to reject the credentials immediately. The machine hummed for several seconds longer than usual, processing data through multiple verification systems. While they waited, Thornfield studied Elena's appearance more carefully, noting the absence of any military bearing or the subtle confidence that usually accompanied high-ranking officials. Her clothes were unremarkable, her jewelry minimal, and her expression suggested patience rather than the indignation he'd expect from someone whose legitimate authority was being questioned. The scanner finally beeped, but instead of the sharp rejection tone they expected, it emitted a series of complex electronic signals that neither guard had heard before. The display screen flickered between multiple verification protocols, cycling through security databases with unusual intensity. Thornfield frowned at the readout, unable to interpret the complex data streams flowing across the monitor. "Something's wrong with the system," he announced, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "These new machines have been glitchy all month. But don't worry, miss, we'll get this sorted out and have you on your way home in no time." He reached for his radio to contact the IT department, already anticipating the congratulations he'd receive for catching such an elaborate fraud attempt. Elena spoke for the first time since approaching the checkpoint, her voice calm and measured. "Sergeant Thornfield, I recommend you contact your supervisor before proceeding further. There may be protocols you're not familiar with regarding my clearance level." Her tone carried no anger or frustration, just a quiet certainty that made both guards exchange uncertain glances. Thornfield's hand hesitated over his radio. The woman's composure was unusual for someone caught in a criminal act, but he'd encountered confident con artists before. More concerning was her use of his name, which she could have read from his uniform nameplate, but somehow felt more personal than that. He decided to call Lieutenant Cole Brennan, the security supervisor, partly to follow proper procedure and partly to have a witness to what promised to be an entertaining arrest. Lieutenant Cole Brennan arrived at the checkpoint within 3 minutes, his polished boots clicking against the concrete with military precision. He'd been hoping for some excitement to break up another routine morning, and Thornfield's radio call about a sophisticated fraud attempt promised exactly that. The security supervisor was young for his rank, eager to prove his competence to superiors who still questioned whether his rapid promotion had been earned or simply the result of personnel shortages. "She's got balls, I'll give her that," Brennan said as he approached the checkpoint, loud enough for Elena to hear through the bulletproof glass. "Claims to have level 9 clearance. Can you believe it?" His voice carried the patronizing tone of someone addressing a particularly dim child. Thornfield grinned and handed over the identification card, watching as his supervisor examined it with exaggerated thoroughness. Elena remained motionless, her posture unchanged from when she'd first approached the checkpoint. Her patience was beginning to unnerve Thornfield, who expected fraudsters to show signs of stress when confronted by authority. Instead, she seemed almost bored, checking her watch with the casual indifference of someone waiting for a delayed appointment rather than facing potential federal charges. Brennan held the identification card up to the morning light, tilting it to examine the holographic security features. The craftsmanship was impressive, he had to admit, but the claim itself was absurd. Level 9 clearance was so restricted that he'd never actually seen legitimate credentials at that level. Most of the personnel on Blackwater Air Base operated with clearances between 3 and 6, with only the base commander and a handful of senior staff holding level 7 access. "Look at this," Brennan said, pointing to specific elements on the card. Professional-grade lamination, proper Department of Defense seals, even the right font for the clearance designation. Someone put real money into this fake. He handed the card to Reeves for closer inspection, treating Elena as if she weren't standing 3 feet away. Whoever made this did their homework, but they made one critical mistake. "What's that, sir?" Reeves asked, playing along with his supervisor's theatrical demonstration. "They gave themselves too high a clearance level," Brennan explained, his voice rising slightly for Elena's benefit. "Level 9 is reserved for Pentagon officials and senior commanders. This young lady looks like she should be serving coffee, not commanding military operations." Both guards laughed appreciatively at their supervisor's wit, while Elena continued her silent vigil. The checkpoint area began attracting attention from other base personnel heading to work. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos slowed her pace as she passed through the adjacent lane, curious about the unusual gathering of security officers around the civilian checkpoint. 2 airmen returning from their morning run paused near the entrance, pretending to stretch while eavesdropping on a conversation. Brennan decided to make the interrogation more official, activating his digital recorder and positioning himself directly in front of the checkpoint window. "Ma'am, I need you to state your full name and explain how you obtained these fraudulent credentials." His tone shifted to bureaucratic formality, but his eyes gleamed with anticipation of breaking down her composure. Elena finally spoke, her voice carrying across the checkpoint area with unexpected authority. "My name is Commander Elena Vasquez, and those credentials are genuine. I recommend you verify them through proper channels before proceeding with any accusations." The certainty in her voice made Brennan pause momentarily, but he quickly recovered his confidence. "Commander Vasquez," he repeated with obvious skepticism. "And what exactly do you command, ma'am? Your local book club?" The guards erupted in laughter, joined by several of the gathering bystanders who appreciated the entertainment on their way to work. Elena's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested she was taking careful note of everyone present. Santos moved closer, recognizing that this situation was escalating beyond routine security procedures. She'd seen enough fraudulent identification attempts to know they usually ended quickly, with suspects either confessing or becoming agitated when confronted. This woman's continued calm was unusual, almost unsettling in its steadiness. Brennan pulled out his portable scanner, a more sophisticated device than the standard checkpoint equipment. If you're so confident these credentials are real, you won't mind submitting to a full biometric verification. The scanner's advanced capabilities could detect even the most sophisticated forgeries, and he was eager to watch this woman's composure crack when faced with irrefutable evidence of her deception. The device hummed to life, connecting to multiple security databases simultaneously. Brennan had used it dozens of times to expose fake military identifications, and the results were always satisfying. Within minutes, he'd have definitive proof of fraud, followed by the arrest and processing that would make this the most interesting morning he'd had in months. Elena extended her hand toward the scanner without hesitation, maintaining eye contact with Brennan throughout the process. Her willingness to submit to biometric verification surprised him slightly, but he assumed she was simply committed to her deception or too naive to understand how thoroughly the advanced scanner would expose her fraud. While the scanner processed her biometric data, more personnel gathered around the checkpoint. Word was spreading through the base about the bold fraud attempt, and several off-duty soldiers had emerged from nearby buildings to witness the arrest they expected would follow shortly. The crowd's energy was festive, treating the situation as morning entertainment rather than a serious security breach. The biometric scanner's processing time stretched longer than anyone expected, its display cycling through verification protocols that Brennan had never seen before. Usually, fraudulent credentials were rejected within 30 seconds, but the device had been working for nearly 3 minutes without producing results. A thin line of sweat appeared on Brennan's forehead despite the cool morning air, though he maintained his confident demeanor for the growing audience. Must be connecting to higher-level databases, Thornfield observed, attempting to sound knowledgeable while privately wondering why the verification was taking so long. He'd operated standard security scanners for years, but this advanced biometric device was beyond his technical understanding. The complex data streams flowing across its screen meant nothing to him, but the extended processing time was making him increasingly uncomfortable. Elena remained perfectly still during the scanning process, her breathing steady and her expression unchanged. Several bystanders commented quietly about her unusual composure, comparing it to the nervous energy they'd observed in previous fraud suspects. Master Sergeant Raymond Kowalski, who'd stopped to watch while heading to the motor pool, noted her military-straight posture despite wearing civilian clothes. "She's either the most confident con artist I've ever seen, or something else is going on here," Kowalski muttered to Santos, who nodded thoughtfully. Both veteran non-commissioned officers had developed instincts about people during their combined 30 years of military service, and something about this situation felt different from typical security theater. Brennan checked his watch and frowned at the scanner's continued operation. The device was accessing databases he'd never seen referenced before, displaying classification levels and security protocols that exceeded his own clearance to understand. Department codes flashed across the screen in combinations that looked official but were completely unfamiliar to him. "Maybe we should contact Major Hendricks," Santos suggested quietly, referring to the base operations commander. "If this is turning into something more complicated than a routine fraud case, she might want to be involved." Brennan shot her a sharp look, unwilling to admit that the situation was developing beyond his control. "No need to bother the Major with this nonsense," he replied firmly. "This scanner will expose her fraud any minute now, and then we can all get back to our real jobs." His voice carried forced confidence, but privately he was beginning to question why the verification was taking so extraordinarily long. The crowd around the checkpoint had grown to nearly 20 people, including several junior officers who delayed their morning routines to witness what promised to be an entertaining arrest. Captain Jennifer Walsh paused her jog to observe the proceedings, initially amused by the bold fraud attempt, but growing increasingly curious about the extended verification process. Elena finally spoke again, her voice cutting through the murmured conversations of the gathered personnel. Lieutenant Brennan, I understand your commitment to security protocols, but this delay is becoming problematic. I have scheduled meetings that require my immediate attention. Her tone remained patient, but carried an undertone of authority that made several observers exchange uncertain glances. Scheduled meetings, Brennan repeated with exaggerated amazement. On a military base, you're not authorized to enter. That's rich. He turned to address the crowd directly, playing to his audience. Ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves a true professional here. Not only does she have fake level 9 clearance, but she's got appointments to keep too. The assembled personnel laughed obligingly, but their amusement was beginning to feel forced. The extended verification time was creating an atmosphere of uncertainty that undermined the entertainment value of watching a fraud being exposed. Several observers checked their own watches, realizing they were becoming late for their own duties. Walsh approached Brennan with the casual authority of an officer addressing a subordinate. Lieutenant, what's the status here? This seems to be taking longer than usual for a routine fraud case. Her question carried enough weight to make Brennan straighten his posture automatically before responding. Just waiting for the scanner to finish processing, ma'am. Should have definitive proof of fraud any moment now. His reply sounded confident, but Walsh noticed the slight tremor in his voice that suggested growing uncertainty about the situation's outcome. The scanner suddenly emitted a series of rapid beeps, followed by a prolonged electronic tone that none of the security personnel had heard before. Brennan leaned forward eagerly, expecting to see the fraud confirmation that would vindicate his judgment and provide the climactic moment his audience was waiting for. Instead, the display showed a complex readout of verification confirmations, with multiple database cross-references indicating successful authentication. Green check marks appeared next to biometric matches, photograph verification, and security clearance confirmation. The scanner's final display showed a single word in large letters: authenticated. Brennan stared at the screen in disbelief, his confident expression wavering for the first time since arriving at the checkpoint. The result made no sense to him, contradicting everything he'd assumed about the situation from the moment he'd first seen Elena's credentials. He tapped the scanner screen several times, wondering if the device was malfunctioning. That can't be right, Thornfield said, voicing what everyone was thinking. The machine must be broken. There's no way those credentials are legitimate. He reached for his radio to contact the IT department, determined to find a technical explanation for the unexpected results. Elena stepped closer to the checkpoint window, her movement drawing everyone's attention. Gentlemen, I believe your verification is complete. Now, if you'll process my entry authorization, I can proceed to my scheduled appointments. Her voice carried a subtle change in tone, less patient and more directive than before. Brennan stared at the authentication result for several more seconds before making a decision that would haunt his career for years to come. There's obviously a system error, he announced loudly enough for the entire crowd to hear. These scanners have been unreliable lately, and I'm not about to compromise base security based on a malfunctioning machine. His voice carried forced authority, but several observers noticed the slight tremor that betrayed his growing uncertainty. Captain Walsh stepped forward, her expression shifting from casual interest to professional concern. Lieutenant, if the biometric scanner authenticated those credentials, perhaps we should contact Major Hendricks before proceeding further. The suggestion carried the weight of a direct order disguised as friendly advice, but Brennan was too committed to his initial assessment to back down gracefully. Ma'am, with respect, I've been handling security for this base for 2 years, and I know a fraud when I see one. No civilian woman her age has level 9 clearance, regardless of what some glitchy scanner says. His response drew murmurs from the crowd, some supportive, but others increasingly skeptical of his judgment. Elena remained motionless throughout this exchange, but her eyes tracked each speaker with the attention of someone taking detailed mental notes. Santos noticed this behavior and felt a growing unease about the situation's trajectory. Something about the woman's stillness reminded her of senior officers she'd served under, the kind who absorb information while planning their responses carefully. Thornfield activated his radio and contacted the base command center, his voice carrying across the checkpoint area. "Command, this is Checkpoint Alpha. We have a potential security breach involving fraudulent Level 9 credentials. Requesting immediate response from Major Hendricks." The radio crackled with acknowledgement, followed by confirmation that the base commander was being notified immediately. Within minutes, the distant sound of approaching vehicles indicated that word of the situation had reached the highest levels of base command. A convoy of 3 military police vehicles approached the main gate, their emergency lights creating a strobing pattern against the morning sky. Behind them followed a command vehicle that made several observers step back automatically. Major Patricia Hendricks emerged from the lead vehicle with the brisk efficiency of a career officer accustomed to handling crises. She surveyed the scene quickly, taking note of the crowd size, the obvious tension around the checkpoint, and Elena's remarkably calm presence at the center of the commotion. Her years of command experience had taught her to read situations rapidly, and this one felt wrong in ways she couldn't immediately articulate. "Lieutenant Brennan, report," she ordered, her voice cutting through the background conversations with practiced authority. Brennan straightened to attention, grateful for the opportunity to present his case to someone who would surely validate his actions. "Ma'am, we have a civilian female attempting to gain unauthorized access using sophisticated fraudulent credentials claiming Level 9 clearance. I followed all proper security protocols and identified this as a clear fraud attempt. The biometric scanner showed some kind of error message, but the credentials are obviously fake based on visual inspection." Hendricks accepted Elena's identification card from Brennan and examined it carefully, her expression revealing nothing about her assessment. The card's quality was exceptional, with security features that would be difficult and expensive to replicate. More concerning was the specific clearance level claimed, which was so high that she'd only encountered it twice in her 15-year career. "Ma'am," Santos interjected respectfully, the biometric scanner showed full authentication. All verification protocols came back positive. Her statement drew sharp looks from both Thornfield and Brennan, who felt their unified front beginning to crack under scrutiny. Hendricks looked up from the identification card to study Elena directly for the first time. What she saw confused her initial expectations completely. The woman appeared to be in her early 30s, professionally composed despite the hostile environment, and showing none of the nervous behavior typical of someone caught in criminal activity. Her posture suggested military training, though she wore no uniform or visible rank indicators. "Miss Vasquez," Hendricks said, using the name from the identification card, "can you explain your business on this base?" Her tone was formal but not accusatory, reflecting years of experience in handling delicate situations that could escalate rapidly if mismanaged. Elena spoke clearly, her voice carrying to everyone in the immediate area. "Major Hendricks, I'm here for a scheduled inspection and transition meeting. My appointment was confirmed through Pentagon channels last week." The specificity of her response surprised several observers, who'd expected vague claims or obvious lies from someone caught in fraud. Hendricks felt a cold sensation in her stomach as pieces of information began forming an unwelcome pattern. 3 days earlier, she'd received notification that a new commanding officer would be arriving for transition briefings, but the message had contained minimal details about timing or the officer's background. The possibility that this woman might be legitimate was beginning to seem less impossible and more terrifying. The Major reached for her secure communication device, preparing to contact Pentagon verification services directly. If Elena's credentials were genuine, the situation had already escalated far beyond acceptable limits. If they were fraudulent, she needed absolute confirmation before proceeding with arrest procedures that could destroy multiple careers. While Hendricks initiated her verification call, the crowd around the checkpoint continued growing. Word had spread throughout the base about the dramatic confrontation, and off-duty personnel were arriving to witness what many expected would be a spectacular arrest. Sergeant First Class Michael Torres placed a $20 bet with Corporal Lisa Chun that the woman would be in handcuffs within 10 minutes. Elena watched these proceedings with unchanging composure, but those closest to her noticed subtle signs of growing impatience. She checked her watch more frequently and shifted her weight slightly, behaviors that suggested someone with important business being delayed by bureaucratic incompetence rather than someone facing exposure and arrest. Major Hendricks waited on hold with Pentagon verification services for nearly 8 minutes, her secure communication device crackling with static as the call was transferred between multiple departments. The delay only increased her growing anxiety about the situation's potential consequences. Behind her, the crowd of base personnel had swelled to over 30 people, with some treating the extended drama as entertainment, while others began recognizing the serious implications of what was unfolding. "This is taking forever," Corporal Chun whispered to Torres, who was beginning to regret his $20 bet as the verification process stretched beyond his predicted timeline. What should have been a simple fraud exposure was developing into something far more complex and potentially embarrassing for everyone involved. Brennan maintained his confident posture, but sweat stains were becoming visible on his uniform despite the cool morning temperature. He'd staked his professional reputation on Elena being a fraud, and the extended verification process was creating doubt among observers who'd initially supported his judgment. Captain Walsh stood nearby with crossed arms, her expression suggesting serious concerns about the security team's handling of the situation. Elena remained in the same position she'd occupied for nearly 30 minutes, but her patience was clearly wearing thin. She checked her watch again and spoke directly to Hendricks in a tone that carried unmistakable authority. "Major, I have a conference call with Pentagon leadership scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. This delay is becoming unacceptable." The specificity of her statement sent ripples of uncertainty through the assembled crowd. A fraud wouldn't reference specific Pentagon meetings, and her continued confidence in the face of extensive verification suggested either elaborate preparation or legitimate authority. Santos exchanged meaningful glances with Kowalski, both recognizing that their initial assessment of the situation might have been completely wrong. Hendricks finally connected with a Pentagon verification specialist, providing Elena's identification numbers and requesting immediate confirmation of clearance status. The conversation was brief but intense, with Hendricks asking several pointed questions about clearance levels and authority documentation. Her expression grew increasingly troubled as she received responses that contradicted her expectations. After ending the call, Hendricks stood motionless for several seconds, processing information that fundamentally changed her understanding of the morning's events. The crowd watched her expectantly, waiting for confirmation that would validate Brennan's security actions and provide the dramatic conclusion they'd been anticipating. "The Pentagon confirms these credentials are legitimate," Hendricks announced, her voice carrying across the checkpoint area with devastating clarity. "The woman standing before us holds authentic Level 9 clearance issued 3 weeks ago." A collective gasp arose from the assembled personnel, followed by stunned silence, as the implications became clear. Brennan's face went completely pale, his confident demeanor crumbling as he realized the magnitude of his error. Thornfield took an unconscious step backward, suddenly understanding that he'd been treating a high-ranking official like a common criminal for the better part of an hour. The betting that had been occurring among bystanders stopped immediately as everyone grasped the serious nature of what they'd witnessed. Elena stepped closer to the checkpoint window, her movement drawing every eye in the area. Her voice carried a new edge of authority that made several junior personnel automatically straighten to attention. "Gentlemen, I believe we can now proceed with standard entry protocols. My identification has been thoroughly verified through multiple channels." Walsh approached Hendricks quickly, speaking in urgent whispers about damage control and proper procedures for handling VIP arrivals. The captain's military training had kicked in, recognizing that the base's leadership was facing a potential public relations disaster that could affect careers throughout the command structure. Hendricks fumbled with the entry authorization controls, her hands shaking slightly as she processed Elena's clearance through the base access system. The woman she'd been observing for the past half hour wasn't just a legitimate military official, but someone with clearance levels that exceeded her own authority by several classifications. "But ma'am," Brennan said desperately, attempting to salvage some justification for his actions, "she's not wearing uniform. How are we supposed to know she was legitimate military personnel?" His voice carried a pleading quality that made several observers wince with embarrassment. Elena turned to address Brennan directly, her expression revealing nothing about her internal thoughts regarding his treatment of her. "Lieutenant, Level 9 clearance holders are not required to wear uniforms during official travel. This information is covered in security protocols that you should have reviewed before assuming checkpoint duties." The crowd began dispersing rapidly as personnel realized they'd been spectators to a serious breach of protocol rather than entertaining security theater. Torres quietly retrieved his $20 from Chun, both understanding that joking about the situation was no longer appropriate given its implications for base leadership. Santos approached Elena with obvious respect, offering to escort her to the base administration building where her scheduled meetings would take place. The staff sergeant's demeanor had completely transformed from curious observer to professional subordinate, recognizing that she was now dealing with someone whose authority exceeded that of anyone else on the base. Hendricks activated her radio to contact base command, preparing to report the incident and request guidance about how to handle the diplomatic and administrative consequences of Elena's treatment. The Major's career had just taken a potentially devastating hit, and she was beginning to understand that the morning's events would require extensive damage control and formal apologies. Elena accepted her identification card back from Hendricks and placed it in her jacket pocket with deliberate care. "Thank you for your thorough verification, Major. I appreciate your commitment to security protocols, even when they result in significant delays." Her tone was professional, but carried undertones that suggested this incident would be remembered and documented for future reference. The checkpoint barrier finally raised with a mechanical whir that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the assembled personnel. Elena walked through the security point with measured steps, her civilian clothes now seeming less like a disguise and more like the confident choice of someone who didn't need a uniform to command respect. Behind her, 30 witnesses tried to process what they'd just observed and their role in what was clearly going to become a significant incident. Santos fell into step beside Elena, her military bearing automatically adjusting to escort protocol despite not knowing the exact nature of Elena's position or authority. "Ma'am, if you'll allow me to guide you to the administration building, I can ensure you reach your scheduled meetings without further delay." Her voice carried the careful respect of a professional soldier addressing a superior whose rank remained unclear but whose authority had been definitively established. Elena nodded acknowledgement, but continued walking at her own pace, taking in details of the base layout with the systematic attention of someone conducting an inspection. She noted the condition of buildings, the maintenance status of vehicles, and the general appearance of personnel they passed. Several junior enlisted members they encountered automatically straightened their posture when they noticed Santos's deferential behavior toward the civilian woman. Behind them at the checkpoint, Hendricks was dealing with the immediate aftermath of the verification debacle. Her radio crackled constantly with requests for updates from various department heads who'd heard about the unusual security situation. Colonel James Morrison, the base's executive officer, demanded a complete briefing within the hour, his tone suggesting that careers might be ending before lunch. Brennan stood frozen beside the checkpoint equipment, staring at the scanner display that still showed Elena's authenticated credentials. The device that had been his salvation was now evidence of his professional failure, documenting his refusal to accept legitimate verification results. Thornfield attempted to busy himself with routine security tasks, but his hands shook as he processed routine entry requests from base personnel who looked at him with barely concealed amusement. Word of the incident was spreading throughout Blackwater Air Base with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. In the communications center, Specialist Rebecca Martinez interrupted her morning radio checks to share details with her supervisor. In the motor pool, Mechanics paused their engine maintenance to debate whether the security team would face disciplinary action or court-martial proceedings. Elena and Santos approached the administration building, a three-story concrete structure that housed the base's command functions and senior officer quarters. The building's imposing facade reflected the institutional authority that Elena would soon be wielding, though Santos remained unaware of the specific nature of her escort's position within the military hierarchy. Master Sergeant James Caldwell emerged from the building's main entrance, having received radio notification about the VIP arrival and the unusual circumstances surrounding her entry to the base. His 22 years of military service had taught him to recognize when situations required careful handling, and the reports he'd received suggested this was one of those moments. "Commander Vasquez," Caldwell said, offering a crisp salute that Elena returned with practiced precision. "I'm Master Sergeant Caldwell, Base Operations Coordinator. I understand there were some complications with your arrival this morning." His diplomatic phrasing acknowledged the incident without assigning blame, demonstrating the political awareness that had earned him his senior enlisted position. Elena's response was equally measured, but carried undertones that suggested she'd taken careful note of every detail from the checkpoint encounter. "Master Sergeant, I appreciate your assistance in resolving the entry procedures. I trust that base security protocols will be reviewed to prevent similar delays for future visitors with appropriate clearance levels." Santos realized with growing alarm that she was witnessing the aftermath of what military personnel euphemistically called a cluster situation, where multiple failures of judgment and procedure combined to create career-ending consequences for everyone involved. The staff sergeant began mentally reviewing her own actions during the checkpoint incident, grateful that she'd maintained professional behavior throughout the embarrassing spectacle. Caldwell escorted Elena into the administration building, noting her familiarity with military facility layouts as she navigated the corridors without requiring direction. Her confidence suggested extensive experience with command structures and institutional protocols, reinforcing his growing suspicion that the morning's security incident had involved someone far more important than initial reports had indicated. In the base conference room, preparations were underway for meetings that Elena had referenced during her checkpoint ordeal. Administrative staff arranged briefing materials and communication equipment for discussions that would apparently involve Pentagon leadership, lending credibility to claims that had seemed outrageous just an hour earlier. Meanwhile, Captain Walsh was conducting damage assessment conversations with other officers who'd witnessed the checkpoint debacle. The consensus was emerging that serious disciplinary action would be required, not just for the security personnel involved, but potentially for the entire chain of command that had allowed such a significant breach of protocol to occur. Elena paused outside the conference room door, checking her watch one final time before entering. Her scheduled Pentagon call was beginning in exactly 10 minutes, and she'd spent nearly 45 minutes dealing with security theater that should have taken less than 2 minutes to resolve. The delay had compressed her transition schedule and would require explanations to Washington leadership about why Blackwater Air Base's entry procedures had proven so problematic. Caldwell opened the conference room door and stepped aside to allow Elena entry, his gesture carrying the respect due to someone whose authority level remained unclear but whose importance had been definitively established. Inside the room, communication equipment was already connecting to Pentagon channels, preparing for discussions that would likely include detailed questions about the morning's unusual arrival procedures. As Elena entered the conference room, Santos remained in the corridor, finally understanding that she'd been witness to something far more significant than a routine security incident. The staff sergeant made a mental note to review her own behavior during the checkpoint encounter, hoping that her professional conduct might protect her from the fallout that was sure to follow. Elena settled into the conference room chair with the fluid efficiency of someone accustomed to high-stakes military briefings, her civilian clothes now seeming deliberately chosen rather than accidentally inappropriate. The secure communication system connected her to Pentagon leadership with crystal clarity, and the voices that greeted her carried the authority of officials who'd been expecting this call for 30 minutes. General Patricia Blackwood's voice crackled through the speakers with barely contained irritation. "Commander Vasquez, we were beginning to wonder if Blackwater had lost our new base commander somewhere between the airport and the front gate." Her tone suggested that explanations would be required, and that those explanations had better be compelling. Elena's response was measured but pointed, designed to convey information without explicitly assigning blame. "General, I encountered some unexpected delays during base entry procedures. Security protocols required extended verification of my credentials, which compressed our scheduled briefing time." Her diplomatic phrasing masked the severity of her treatment, while creating a paper trail that would protect her from any suggestion that she'd mishandled the situation. Caldwell, who remained in the conference room to provide technical support, felt his stomach drop as he realized the scope of what had occurred at the checkpoint. The woman who'd been treated like a common fraud suspect was apparently the incoming base commander, someone whose authority would soon exceed that of everyone currently stationed at Blackwater Air Base. The Pentagon briefing continued with discussions of transition timelines, personnel evaluations, and operational readiness assessments that made Elena's true position increasingly clear to anyone listening. General Blackwood referenced classified operations and strategic initiatives that only senior commanders would be authorized to discuss, confirming that Elena's Level 9 clearance wasn't just legitimate, but actively essential to her duties. Back at the checkpoint, word of Elena's true identity was spreading through official channels with devastating speed. Colonel Morrison arrived at the security station with his aide and a digital recorder, preparing to conduct immediate interviews with everyone involved in the morning's debacle. His expression suggested that heads would roll before the day ended. Brennan and Thornfield stood at attention, while Morrison reviewed the incident timeline, their earlier confidence replaced by the sick realization that they'd potentially destroyed their military careers before noon. The colonel's questions were sharp and unforgiving, focused on identifying every failure of judgment and procedure that had led to such an unprecedented breach of protocol. "Did it occur to either of you gentlemen that someone with legitimate Level 9 clearance might actually possess legitimate Level 9 clearance?" Morrison's voice carried the withering contempt of a career officer addressing subordinates who'd failed spectacularly in their basic duties. The question hung in air like an accusation that neither security guard could adequately answer. Meanwhile, throughout the base, personnel were learning about Elena's true identity through rapidly spreading rumors and official notifications. In the mess hall, conversations stopped mid-sentence as soldiers realized they'd been spectators to the humiliation of their incoming commanding officer. Kitchen staff who'd been preparing routine meals suddenly understood they might be serving the new base commander within hours. Santos reported to her immediate supervisor, Sergeant First Class William Kruger, with a detailed account of her observations during the checkpoint incident. Her professional behavior during the encounter now seemed prescient rather than simply proper, and Kruger made careful notes about her conduct for future reference during what promised to be extensive investigations. The base communications center buzzed, with encrypted messages flowing between Blackwater and Pentagon leadership, each transmission carrying updates about the transition process and increasingly urgent requests for damage control strategies. Communications specialist Martinez found herself handling classified traffic volumes that exceeded normal weekly totals within a single morning. Elena's Pentagon briefing continued with tactical assessments and personnel reviews that demonstrated her comprehensive knowledge of Blackwater's operations despite her recent arrival. Her questions about specific departments and strategic initiatives revealed preparation that extended far beyond surface-level familiarization, suggesting months of advanced planning for her assumption of command. General Blackwood addressed logistical concerns about Elena's transition schedule, noting that the delayed arrival had compressed critical briefing timelines. The Pentagon leadership clearly viewed Blackwater as a priority assignment requiring immediate attention from Elena's specialized expertise in areas that remained classified even during their secure communication. Caldwell took notes throughout the briefing, recognizing that he was witnessing the transition of command authority that would fundamentally change Blackwater's operational structure. The Master Sergeant's years of experience had taught him to anticipate leadership changes, but Elena's arrival carried implications that extended far beyond routine personnel rotations. As the Pentagon call concluded, Elena requested immediate scheduling of base leadership meetings to begin her formal transition process. Her tone carried the authority of someone accustomed to having requests treated as directives, and Caldwell found himself automatically shifting into subordinate mode despite not yet understanding the full scope of her command authority. The conference room fell silent as Elena ended her Pentagon communication and turned her attention to base-specific matters. Her civilian clothes no longer seemed inappropriate, but rather indicated someone confident enough in her authority to dispense with traditional military displays of rank and position. Outside the administration building, base personnel went about their duties with a heightened awareness that comes from witnessing significant institutional events. The checkpoint incident had become more than morning entertainment. It was now a cautionary tale about assumptions, protocol failures, and the consequences of prejudging authority based on appearances. Elena checked her watch and began reviewing briefing materials that Caldwell had arranged on the conference table. Her transition to command was proceeding despite the morning's unusual complications, and she was already shifting focus toward the operational challenges that had brought her to Blackwater Air Base with such urgency and classified authority. Colonel Morrison completed his preliminary interviews at the checkpoint and immediately contacted base legal services, recognizing that the morning's incident would require formal investigation procedures and potential disciplinary action that could affect multiple careers. The magnitude of humiliating an incoming base commander during her arrival created liability issues that extended far beyond routine security breaches. Major Hendricks sat in her office reviewing personnel files for Brennan and Thornfield, preparing comprehensive reports that would document their service records and explain how two otherwise competent security personnel had made such catastrophic errors in judgment. Her own career was also in jeopardy, as the incident had occurred under her supervision and reflected poorly on her leadership capabilities. Elena emerged from the conference room with Caldwell, her bearing now unmistakably that of a commanding officer despite her continued civilian dress. Personnel they encountered in the corridors automatically stepped aside and offered respectful nods, word having spread throughout the base about her true identity and authority level. The transformation in their behavior was immediate and complete. In the base medical facility, Captain Lisa Romano was treating Corporal Chun for stress-related symptoms that had developed after learning about Elena's identity and her own role as a spectator to the checkpoint debacle. The base psychologist was already fielding requests for counseling sessions from personnel who were struggling to process their involvement in such a significant protocol failure. Elena reviewed organizational charts and personnel assessments that Caldwell had prepared for her transition briefing, taking particular note of security department leadership and recent performance evaluations. Her questions were specific and probing, suggesting that she was already formulating plans for organizational changes that would address the systemic failures revealed by her arrival experience. The base public affairs office received urgent directives to prepare damage control statements in case news of the incident reached external media outlets. Captain David Price worked frantically to develop explanations that would minimize negative publicity while acknowledging that proper procedures had been followed, despite evidence suggesting exactly the opposite. Thornfield submitted his resignation letter to Hendricks within 2 hours of Elena's identity confirmation, unable to face the prospect of serving under a commanding officer whom he'd treated with such disrespect and professional incompetence. His decision reflected the understanding that his military career had effectively ended the moment he dismissed Elena's legitimate credentials. Elena requested detailed briefings about base security protocols and recent training procedures, her questions revealing particular interest in checkpoint operations and verification processes. Caldwell recognized that she was conducting a systematic analysis of the failures that had delayed her entry, preparing recommendations that would likely result in comprehensive policy changes. Santos volunteered to testify about her observations during the checkpoint incident, recognizing that her professional conduct during the encounter might distinguish her from other personnel who treated the situation as entertainment. Her detailed account provided valuable perspective about crowd dynamics and the escalating nature of the confrontation. The base chaplain, Captain Robert Martinez, prepared for increased counseling requests from personnel struggling with guilt and anxiety about their roles in Elena's mistreatment. Several junior enlisted members who'd made jokes about the situation were experiencing significant remorse after learning they'd been mocking their future commanding officer. Elena's transition briefing expanded to include discussions of leadership philosophy and operational priorities that revealed her extensive background in command positions and specialized training. Her questions about base readiness and strategic capabilities demonstrated knowledge that could only come from high-level Pentagon briefings and classified operational assessments. Morrison convened an emergency leadership meeting to address immediate damage control needs and begin planning for formal apologies and corrective actions. The colonel understood that Elena's first impression of Blackwater's command structure had been thoroughly negative, requiring significant effort to rebuild professional relationships before she assumed full authority. Brennan remained at his post under direct supervision, his security clearance under review pending completion of the formal investigation. His earlier confidence had been replaced by the hollow realization that his prejudices and assumptions had damaged not only his own career, but potentially the reputation of the entire security department. Elena completed her initial base assessment and requested scheduling of individual meetings with department heads, beginning with security leadership to address the obvious procedural failures that had complicated her arrival. Her approach was systematic and professional, focused on institutional improvement rather than personal retribution. The base communications center processed urgent messages to Pentagon leadership providing updates about Elena's successful arrival and initial transition activities. The messages carefully omitted details about checkpoint delays, focusing instead on her rapid integration into command responsibilities and preliminary operational assessments. Caldwell arranged Elena's temporary quarters in the Distinguished Visitor Facility, recognizing that her permanent command housing would require several days to prepare properly. The accommodations reflected her senior status while providing necessary security and communication capabilities for her continued Pentagon coordination requirements. As afternoon approached, base personnel began adapting to the reality of Elena's presence and authority. Their earlier assumptions replaced by professional respect tinged with embarrassment about the morning's events. The transformation in base dynamics was visible throughout every department as word spread about their new commanding officer's arrival and the circumstances surrounding her entry. Elena reviewed final briefing materials in preparation for a formal assumption of command ceremony, scheduled for the following week, but now requiring significant modifications to address the morning's complications. Her focus remained fixed on operational responsibilities despite the unusual beginning to her tenure at Blackwater Air Base. Elena's first department head meeting convened in the base conference room at precisely 1400 hours, with section leaders arriving early and arranging themselves with the nervous precision of subordinates meeting a new commanding officer under less than ideal circumstances. The morning's checkpoint incident cast a shadow over introductions, as each officer wondered whether their future career prospects had been damaged by their base's spectacular failure in protocol. Major Hendricks entered the conference room last, carrying comprehensive reports about the security department's operations and a formal letter accepting full responsibility for the morning's failures. Her 20-year military career hung in the balance, dependent on Elena's assessment of leadership accountability and her willingness to distinguish between individual incompetence and systemic problems. Elena took her position at the head of the conference table with the natural authority of someone accustomed to command responsibilities, her civilian clothes now seeming like a deliberate choice to demonstrate confidence rather than an oversight in military bearing. Her opening remarks were measured and professional, focusing on operational priorities rather than dwelling on personal grievances about her arrival experience. Gentlemen and ladies, I'm Commander Elena Vasquez, and I'll be assuming command of Blackwater Air Base effective Monday morning. I understand there were some complications with entry procedures today, but I'm more interested in discussing your department's readiness status and operational capabilities than reviewing security protocols we've already addressed through other channels. Her diplomatic approach provided subtle reassurance to department heads who'd been dreading confrontational discussions about the checkpoint debacle, though everyone understood that consequences would still follow through appropriate administrative channels. Captain Walsh visibly relaxed, recognizing that Elena was separating personal treatment from professional responsibilities. Elena's questions during the briefing revealed extensive preparation and detailed knowledge about Blackwater's strategic importance, classified operations, and personnel capabilities that could only have come from months of advanced planning and high-level Pentagon briefings. Her inquiries about specific equipment, training programs, and readiness assessments demonstrated the expertise that had earned her Level 9 clearance and command authority. The discussion shifted to operational challenges and resource requirements, with Elena taking detailed notes about infrastructure needs, personnel shortages, and equipment maintenance issues that affected base readiness. Her focus on practical problems rather than administrative failures helped department heads concentrate on professional responsibilities instead of personal anxieties about career consequences. Morrison presented base-wide statistics and performance metrics, noting areas where Blackwater exceeded Pentagon standards and others requiring improvement focus. Elena's responses indicated familiarity with comparative data from other installations, suggesting that her command assignment was part of broader strategic initiatives involving multiple military facilities. Santos knocked on the conference room door and entered with urgent communication traffic from Pentagon leadership, providing Elena with classified updates that required immediate attention. Her professional handling of the interruption impressed department heads, who observed her seamless transition between administrative meetings and operational command responsibilities. Elena's review of personnel files revealed particular interest in junior officers and enlisted personnel who demonstrated exceptional performance or leadership potential, suggesting that her command philosophy emphasized development and advancement rather than merely maintaining existing operational standards. Her questions about promotion recommendations and training opportunities indicated long-term planning for organizational improvement. The meeting concluded with Elena establishing regular briefing schedules and communication protocols that would ensure continuous coordination between departments during her transition to full command authority. Her systematic approach to institutional management provided reassurance about her leadership capabilities while maintaining professional distance from morning events. Department heads departed the conference room with mixed feelings of relief and apprehension, understanding that Elena's professionalism didn't eliminate consequences for the checkpoint incident, but suggested that retribution wouldn't dominate her command priorities. The contrast between her actual leadership style and their morning assumptions was stark and humbling. Elena remained in the conference room with Caldwell to review classified briefing materials that had arrived during the department meeting, including operational directives and strategic assessments that would guide her initial command decisions. Her focus on immediate responsibilities demonstrated the priority she placed on mission accomplishment over personal grievances. As evening approached, base personnel continued processing the day's events and their implications for future operations under Elena's command. The transformation from morning mockery to afternoon respect had been swift and complete, though the underlying lessons about assumptions and professional judgment would require longer to fully internalize. Elena's temporary quarters were prepared with communication equipment and security protocols appropriate for her clearance level and command responsibilities. The distinguished visitor facility had been upgraded to accommodate her needs, while permanent command housing underwent modifications for her extended assignment at Blackwater Air Base. The base operational tempo continued without disruption despite the morning's complications, demonstrating the institutional resilience that had impressed Elena during her initial assessments. Her confidence in Blackwater's capabilities remained high, though she recognized that leadership changes will be necessary to address the systemic issues revealed by her arrival experience. Late evening reports to Pentagon leadership provided positive assessments of Elena's integration into base operations and her preliminary evaluations of organizational readiness. The communications carefully emphasized operational continuity and strategic capability while omitting details about entry procedure complications that were being handled through separate administrative channels. The formal investigation into the checkpoint incident began at 0800 hours the following morning, with Colonel Morrison presiding over proceedings that would determine the professional fate of everyone involved in Elena's mistreatment. A team of investigators from Pentagon Internal Affairs had arrived overnight, their presence indicating that the incident's implications extended far beyond routine disciplinary action. Brennan sat across from the investigation panel in dress uniform, his military decorations now seeming like artifact from a career that had effectively ended 24 hours earlier. His testimony revealed the depth of his assumptions about Elena's legitimacy, documenting prejudices that had blinded him to obvious indicators of her authentic authority and professional competence. Elena participated in the investigation as a witness rather than a complainant. Her testimony focused on procedural failures and systemic issues rather than personal grievances against individual personnel. Her professional approach impressed the investigation team, who noted her emphasis on institutional improvement over punitive measures for subordinates who'd acted according to their training limitations. The investigation revealed that checkpoint security protocols had never addressed scenarios involving high-clearance officials arriving in civilian clothes, creating a procedural gap that had contributed to the morning's failures. Elena's case exposed training deficiencies that affected base-wide security operations, requiring comprehensive policy revisions and enhanced instruction for all security personnel. Thornfield's resignation was formally accepted during afternoon proceedings, his military career ending with a general discharge that reflected both his protocol failures and his recognition of professional incompetence. His departure created immediate vacancy in security operations, requiring rapid personnel reassignment and accelerated training for replacement checkpoint staff. Elena conducted her second day of transition briefings with department heads who approached their new commanding officer with increased respect and professional deference. The contrast between their current behavior and Monday's checkpoint atmosphere was stark, demonstrating how completely their perceptions had shifted following verification of her legitimate authority. Santos testified about her observations during the checkpoint incident, her professional conduct throughout the encounter providing positive contrast to the failures demonstrated by security leadership. Her detailed account helped investigators understand crowd dynamics and the escalating nature of confrontational behavior that had prolonged Elena's humiliation. The Pentagon Internal Affairs team expanded their investigation to include base-wide security training programs and leadership oversight mechanisms, recognizing that the incident reflected broader institutional weaknesses rather than isolated individual failures. Their recommendations would likely affect security operations at multiple military installations beyond Blackwater Air Base. Elena's preliminary command assessments identified immediate priorities for operational improvement, including enhanced security training, revised identification verification procedures, and strengthened leadership accountability measures. Her systematic approach to institutional change demonstrated the strategic thinking that had earned her rapid advancement to senior command positions. Major Hendricks met privately with Elena to discuss her future role in base security operations, understanding that her career trajectory had been permanently altered by her subordinates' failures and her own supervisory inadequacies. The conversation was professional, but acknowledged the serious nature of leadership accountability in military command structures. The investigation documented timeline details that revealed the extended nature of Elena's mistreatment, from initial dismissal through prolonged verification procedures that had delayed her transition activities and compressed critical briefing schedules. The comprehensive record would serve as evidence in disciplinary proceedings and policy revision processes. Elena's evening briefing with Pentagon leadership provided detailed assessments of Blackwater's operational readiness and recommendations for addressing systemic issues revealed by her arrival experience. Her ability to separate personal treatment from professional responsibilities impressed senior officials who recognized her potential for additional command assignments. Base personnel continued adapting to Elena's presence and command style, their initial assumptions replaced by growing respect for her professional competence and leadership capabilities. The transformation in institutional culture was visible throughout every department as subordinates adjusted to serving under a commander whose authority they had initially questioned. The investigation team prepared preliminary findings that would guide disciplinary decisions and policy recommendations. Their work complicated by the need to balance individual accountability with institutional learning opportunities. Elena's cooperative testimony and professional approach had helped focus attention on systemic improvements rather than purely punitive measures. As Elena's second day at Blackwater concluded, base operations continued with increasing smoothness despite the ongoing investigation and personnel changes in security departments. Her leadership presence was already affecting institutional culture, demonstrating the rapid impact that competent command authority could have on organizational effectiveness. The checkpoint where Elena's ordeal had begun was now staffed by replacement personnel who'd received enhanced training about identification verification procedures and proper protocols for handling high-clearance officials. The physical location remained unchanged, but its operational significance had been transformed by lessons learned from Monday morning's failures. Elena reviewed final briefing materials in preparation for her formal assumption of command ceremony, now scheduled for Friday morning with full military honors and Pentagon representation. The ceremony would mark her official transition to base command while symbolically closing the chapter on her unusual arrival experience. Friday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and the heightened activity that preceded major military ceremonies, as Blackwater Air Base prepared for Elena's formal assumption of command. The investigation's preliminary findings had been submitted to Pentagon leadership, resulting in policy directives that would affect security protocols at installations throughout the military system, transforming Elena's humiliating arrival into a catalyst for institutional change. The ceremony staging area buzzed with preparation activities as honor guards rehearsed formations and communication teams tested equipment for live Pentagon feeds that would broadcast the event to senior military leadership. Elena's transition had attracted high-level attention due to both her specialized qualifications and the unusual circumstances surrounding her arrival at Blackwater. Brennan cleared his personal effects from base housing under escort, his security clearance permanently revoked, and his military career concluded with administrative efficiency that reflected the serious nature of his protocol failures. His departure was witnessed by few personnel, most preferring to focus on the day's ceremonial activities rather than dwelling on consequences from earlier failures. Elena conducted final briefings with department heads in the hours before the ceremony. Her discussions focused on immediate operational priorities and long-term strategic objectives that would guide Blackwater's mission under her command. Her systematic approach to institutional leadership had already begun affecting base culture, with personnel demonstrating increased professionalism and attention to proper procedures. General Patricia Blackwood arrived from Pentagon headquarters to preside over the change of command ceremony, her presence indicating the strategic importance of Elena's assignment and the high-level confidence in her leadership capabilities. The general's opening remarks would acknowledge the unusual beginning to Elena's tenure, while emphasizing the institutional learning that had resulted from recent events. Santos received notification of her promotion to Staff Sergeant, effective immediately, in recognition of her professional conduct during the checkpoint incident and her valuable testimony during investigation proceedings. Her advancement served as positive reinforcement for proper behavior, while demonstrating that career opportunities existed for personnel who maintained appropriate standards under pressure. The base honor guard assembled in dress uniforms that gleamed with military precision, their formations practiced and movements coordinated to reflect the ceremonial significance of formal command transfer. The visual display would provide dignified closure to Elena's transition period while marking the beginning of her official authority over Blackwater operations. Elena reviewed her prepared remarks for the ceremony, focusing on themes of institutional excellence, professional development, and operational readiness that would guide her command philosophy. Her speech avoided direct reference to arrival complications, instead emphasizing lessons learned and future opportunities for organizational improvement and strategic advancement. Pentagon officials participated in the ceremony through secure video connection, their virtual presence adding gravitas to proceedings while demonstrating the strategic importance of Blackwater's mission and Elena's role in broader military objectives. The technology allowed senior leadership to witness the transition despite geographical constraints and classified operational requirements. Major Hendricks participated in the ceremony despite her uncertain career prospects, her presence reflecting Elena's emphasis on institutional continuity over personal grievances. The Major's future assignments would depend on investigation outcomes and Elena's assessment of her leadership potential, but she remained focused on professional responsibilities rather than personal anxieties. The base community gathered for the ceremony with enthusiasm tempered by recent events, their respect for Elena's leadership having grown significantly since her arrival. Personnel who'd witnessed or participated in the checkpoint incident now understood the magnitude of their initial misjudgment and the professional qualities of their new commanding officer. Elena's formal remarks emphasized themes of mutual respect, professional competence, and institutional pride that would characterize her leadership approach at Blackwater. Her vision for base operations included enhanced training programs, improved communication protocols, and strengthened accountability measures that would prevent future protocol failures while maximizing operational effectiveness. General Blackwood's presentation of command authority included specific recognition of Elena's grace under pressure during her arrival, transforming what could have been career-damaging humiliation into evidence of professional strength and leadership character. The ceremony acknowledged difficulties while celebrating Elena's ability to maintain focus on institutional responsibilities despite personal mistreatment. The formal transfer of command concluded with traditional military honors and the raising of Elena's command flag, symbolizing her official authority over Blackwater Air Base and its strategic mission. The ceremony marked both an ending and a beginning, closing the chapter on arrival complications while opening Elena's tenure as commanding officer. Post-ceremony reception activities provided opportunity for Elena to interact personally with base personnel, many meeting their new commander for the first time under appropriate circumstances. The contrast between ceremony interactions and checkpoint encounters was stark, demonstrating the difference between proper protocol and the failures that had characterized her arrival experience. As the day concluded, Elena assumed her command responsibilities with full institutional support and clear operational mandates for Pentagon leadership. Her unusual arrival had become part of Blackwater's institutional memory, serving as a lasting reminder about assumptions, protocol importance, and the consequences of prejudging authority based on superficial characteristics rather than verified credentials. 6 months after Elena's assumption of command, Blackwater Air Base had transformed into a model installation that attracted Pentagon officials and military educators seeking examples of institutional excellence and operational effectiveness. The checkpoint incident had become a case study in leadership development programs, demonstrating how apparent disasters could become catalysts for positive organizational change when handled with professional competence and strategic vision. Elena stood in her office reviewing quarterly performance reports that documented dramatic improvements across every measurable category of base operations. Personnel retention rates had increased significantly. Training scores exceeded Pentagon standards by substantial margins, and operational readiness indicators consistently ranked Blackwater among the military's top-performing installations. The new security protocols implemented following her arrival had been adopted at installations worldwide, creating standardized procedures for handling high-clearance officials and eliminating the procedural gaps that had contributed to her initial mistreatment. Elena's experience had influenced policy changes affecting thousands of military personnel and countless future interactions between security staff and authorized visitors. Santos approached Elena's office for her monthly leadership development meeting, her recent promotion to Sergeant First Class reflecting the career advancement opportunities that had become hallmarks of Elena's command philosophy. The professional growth opportunities at Blackwater now attracted ambitious personnel from other installations seeking accelerated development under Elena's mentorship programs. Elena's reputation had spread throughout military leadership circles, earning her recognition as an innovative commander whose arrival story demonstrated remarkable grace under pressure and ability to transform negative experiences into institutional learning opportunities. Her name appeared regularly on promotion lists and special assignment considerations for positions requiring exceptional leadership capabilities. The base community had developed a culture of professional excellence that extended beyond military personnel to include civilian contractors and family members who appreciated the positive environment Elena had fostered. Blackwater's reputation for fair treatment and professional development attracted high-quality personnel while reducing disciplinary problems and administrative complaints. Elena received notification of her selection for promotion to colonel, effective at the completion of her Blackwater assignment, along with transfer orders to Pentagon headquarters, where she would oversee security protocol development for installations globally. Her expertise gained from the checkpoint experience would guide policy creation affecting military facilities worldwide. The monthly base newsletter featured stories about personnel achievements and operational successes that reflected Elena's emphasis on recognizing excellence and celebrating professional accomplishments. The publication had become a recruitment tool for attracting talented individuals seeking assignment to an installation known for supporting career advancement and personal development. Elena's weekly staff meetings continued to emphasize lessons learned from her arrival experience, using the checkpoint incident as a teaching tool for discussing assumptions, professional judgment, and the importance of treating all individuals with respect regardless of appearance or preconceptions. The discussions had become legendary among base personnel for their practical wisdom and leadership insights. Major Hendricks, who'd been retained in her position after demonstrating significant improvement in leadership capabilities, credited Elena's mentorship with saving her career and providing growth opportunities she'd never imagined possible. The Major's transformation from anxious supervisor to confident leader exemplified Elena's ability to develop subordinate potential rather than simply punish past failures. The checkpoint where Elena's ordeal had begun now featured a small plaque commemorating the importance of professional conduct and proper protocol adherence, serving as a permanent reminder for security personnel about their responsibilities and the potential consequences of prejudgment. The memorial had become an unofficial pilgrimage site for military police training programs. Elena's final base inspection before her Pentagon transfer revealed an installation operating at peak efficiency with personnel who demonstrated pride in their service and confidence in their leadership. The transformation from her arrival day to her departure reflected institutional changes that would continue influencing Blackwater's culture long after her transfer to new responsibilities. As Elena prepared for her departure ceremony, she reflected on the journey from humiliating arrival to triumphant command completion, recognizing that her initial mistreatment had ultimately provided opportunities for growth and positive change that might not have occurred under normal circumstances. The checkpoint incident had become a defining moment that shaped both her leadership philosophy and Blackwater's institutional character. The base personnel gathered for Elena's farewell ceremony understood they were losing a commander who had transformed their installation from a routine assignment into a destination that military professionals sought for career advancement and professional development. Her legacy would continue influencing operations and personnel development for years beyond her departure. If this story of transformation and professional excellence resonated with you, drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment or character. Have you ever witnessed someone whose hidden authority completely changed how they were treated, or experienced a situation where initial judgments proved completely wrong? Share your thoughts about leadership, respect, and the power of maintaining dignity under pressure.